There's a few things that the vagus might be affected by. It's a very, very long nerve, and the word vagus comes from the same root as vagrant, which means someone who wanders around aimlessly. Well, not aimlessly in this case, but wanders around. So the vagus is a long nerve. It begins in the brainstem through these nuclei in the brainstem, back here, the back of your head, and then comes out down through your next to your jugular vein, out through your cranium, in your jugular foramen, and then comes down the neck next to your carotid artery, and it comes down under your clavicle, left and right here, goes down to the heart on the left here, goes to the lungs, and then goes through your diaphragm next to your esophagus. So there's one that goes in front, anterior to the esophagus, and one to the posterior. So that's very close to, well, we go right over it when we do the lower respiratory work. And then this is more old vagus. It's innervates all the organs of digestion. So your stomach, pancreas, spleen, liver, kidneys, small intestine, large intestine, part of your large intestine. So the ascending colon and more or less halfway along the transverse. So a massively long nerve, and it's got various sort of ganglions and all kinds of stuff. Plexi as it goes along. And this can be affected by quite a few different things. So firstly, I would say nerve entrapment. And of course, that's something we work a lot with Bowen, but it's not just that. So when you think of nerve entrapment, most people think, oh, it's a nerve and it's stuck between, something like two vertebrae or something like this, which of course is not the case at all. Nerve entrapment is all to do with nerves are pretty sensitive little things, and the vagus is also very, very sensitive. So, you might get a situation where the vagus is rubbing up against something. Now, in one of the classic places which we'll look at is around the neck, and the vagus becomes very, very close to C1 and particularly C2 here. So there's a possibility there you can get nerve entrapment there. But vagus also can be affected by stretching. So like things like head forward posture tend to stretch the vagus. Also, the vagus is surrounded by fascia and is embedded in a network of fascia. So there's quite a lot that might happen around the neck in terms of that. And of course, all nerves are supplied by specific blood vessels, and that can be affected by density, rigidity in the fascia, which is all something that we help with. And of course, all nerves can be inflamed. They can get inflamed, and the vagus can also get inflamed, and that can affect it as well. So other things that affect the vagus are viruses. We've seen this a lot with the whole COVID thing, which is interesting because for long COVID now is being studied a lot in terms of the vagus, which is interesting, but it comes up a lot with things like chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, and that can often be triggered by viruses. But when you look at what affects the vagus, it can be many, many different things. So also bacteria. So bacteria might happen in the case of Lyme's disease, for example. Lyme's disease is a bacteria which affects the vagus quite strongly. And you might get very, very similar symptoms to a virus there. Trauma. Trauma where there's a kind of a feeling of lack of safety. You see this a lot with babies, where they go maybe into a freeze state, like an old vagal state, a shutdown state, to protect themselves. Or they might go into a more sympathetic state, which is more sort of actively crying and things like that. So trauma has a massive effect on the vagus. The gut microbiome has a very interesting relationship with the vagus. The vagus is mostly sensory, but it's also motor. And so the vagus is always constantly monitoring things like inflammation in the gut. But it's also, the development of the vagus is also stimulated by the gut microbiome. So this is why the gut has such a big effect on things like mood and anxiety. And that's been studied a lot, as you probably know, through the GAPS diet, the work of Natasha Campbell-McBride and all that stuff. But very interesting. So, for example, babies' exposure to bacteria, it only takes a little bit of, some bacteria to help stimulate brain development and also development of the vagus as well. So that's all very interesting. But also social things will affect the vagus. So if someone is socially isolated, if they're living on their own, they don't go out much, this has a big effect on their health. And the vagus, how well the vagus works, is often called vagal tone. Vagal tone is how well the vagus is operating. And we know that people who live on their own have a shorter life expectancy. They tend to have more health problems because the vagal tone is probably the best measure of health that there is, full stop. So very important that. And of course, anxiety and stress affect the vagus, but also that kind of like the vagus also helps to control that as well. So it's a kind of two-way process.